July 19th, 1945. Patience Bay, off the eastern coast of Karafuto. Commander Eugene Bennett Fluckey pressed his eye against the periscope lens, watching the thin trail of smoke rise above the coastal mountains. The rhythmic chug of a locomotive echoed faintly across the water, carrying troops and supplies along tracks that hugged the shoreline. In that moment, staring at something no submarine commander had ever seriously considered attacking, Fluckey made a decision that would rewrite the rules of naval warfare. A submarine was about to declare war on a train. The impossibility of what he was contemplating should have stopped him immediately. Submarines fought ships. They torpedoed convoys, stalked destroyers, avoided detection in the depths. They did not send landing parties ashore onto enemy territory to blow up railroads. Yet here was Commander Fluckey, already the most decorated submarine skipper in the Pacific, watching that distant plume of steam and thinking the unthinkable. His crew had spent months turning the USS Barb into something unprecedented, a submarine that launched rockets at shore installations, that penetrated harbours considered impenetrable, that survived situations that should have ended in watery graves. Now they would attempt something that existed nowhere in naval doctrine. They would become saboteurs. The audacity of the plan stood in stark contrast to everything submarines were designed to do. The Gato-class submarine USS Barb, commissioned on July 8, 1942, stretched 311 feet 9 inches from bow to stern and displaced 1,526 tons on the surface. She carried 10 torpedo tubes, 6 forward and 4 aft, loaded with Mark 14 torpedoes designed to sink ships. Her 4 diesel engines generated 5,400 horsepower, pushing her to speeds of 20.25 knots on the surface. Underwater, electric motors drove her through the depths at 8.75 knots. She was built for stealth, for striking from beneath the waves, for disappearing into the ocean's embrace. She was not built to send men paddling through enemy waters in rubber rafts to commit acts of demolition on foreign soil. But Commander Fluckey had never been constrained by what submarines were supposed to do. The journey to this impossible moment had begun 4 years earlier in the shipyards of Groton, Connecticut. The Barb emerged from the Electric Boat Company as one of 77 Gato-class submarines that would form the backbone of America's undersea war against Japan. Her early patrols in the Atlantic and Mediterranean proved unremarkable. 5 war patrols spent hunting Axis blockade runners with little success. The submarine force leadership recognized what many crews already knew. The Barb was capable of far more than her record suggested. She needed the right commander. In April 1944, they found him. Eugene Bennett Fluckey was born in Washington, D.C. on October 5, 1913, and graduated from the United States Naval Academy on June 6, 1935. Before taking command of the Barb, he had served on surface ships and commanded the submarine USS 42. He attended the prospective commanding officer school in New London, Connecticut, and emerged with a reputation for aggressive thinking that made traditional officers nervous. At 30 years old, assuming command of his second submarine on April 27, 1944, Fluckey brought to the Barb something more dangerous than any weapon, a willingness to treat naval doctrine as suggestions rather than limitations. His crew called him Lucky Fluckey, partly for the seemingly impossible escapes he engineered, partly because serving under him felt like winning a lottery of survival combined with spectacular success. The Barb's first patrol under Fluckey departed Midway Atoll on May 21, 1944, bound for the Sea of Okhotsk. Within days, the crew understood they were serving under a different breed of commander. On May 31st, Fluckey attacked and sank the cargo ships Koto Maru and Madras Maru in a single engagement. 2 days later, he manoeuvred the Barb into ice fields to escape depth charge attacks, hiding among pack ice where no submarine commander had dared venture. On June 11th, he surfaced to engage 2 trawlers with deck guns, then submerged to torpedo and sink the fishing vessels Chihaya Maru and Toten Maru hours later. 2 days after that, He expended his last 2 torpedoes to destroy a passenger cargo ship. The Barb returned to Midway on July 5th, credited with sinking 15,472 tons of enemy shipping in a single patrol. The crew realized they were no longer just submariners. They were revolutionaries. The transformation accelerated with each subsequent patrol. During the 9th patrol in August 1944, the Barb joined with USS Queenfish and USS Tunney to form a wolf pack hunting in the South China Sea. On August 31st, they converged on a heavily escorted convoy. While Queenfish led the attack, Flucky manoeuvred the Barb through the chaos, firing torpedoes that struck a tanker and freighter. Hours later, after a bird repeatedly landed on the periscope obscuring his vision, Flucky waited patiently until it flew away, then fired 3 torpedoes into the Okuni Maru, breaking the freighter in half. Days later, on September 15th through 16th, while racing to rescue Allied prisoners from a torpedoed Japanese transport, the Barb encountered an enemy convoy. Flucky made a decision that encapsulated his entire philosophy of submarine warfare. Rather than bypassing the convoy to reach the rescue zone, he attacked. 6 torpedoes from the Barb sank the 11,700-ton tanker Azusa. 3 more torpedoes struck the 20,000-ton escort carrier Unyo at 0037 hours on September 17th, one of only 4 Japanese carriers sunk by American submarines during the entire war. The carrier sank that morning at approximately 7:55. Then Flucky proceeded to the rescue zone, where the Barb's crew pulled 14 British and Australian prisoners from small rafts bobbing in typhoon-roiled seas, sailors taking turns diving into dangerous waters to save men who had been shipwrecked for days. But it was the 11th War Patrol, departing Pearl Harbor on December 19, 1944, that would earn Flucky the Medal of Honor and cement the Barb's reputation as the most dangerous submarine in the Pacific. The patrol began with Flucky tracking a Japanese convoy working up the Chinese coast. On January 1, 1945, the Barb destroyed several small vessels with gunfire. A week later, on January 8th, Flucky launched a running 2-hour night battle in the Formosa Strait, torpedoing and sinking the ships Shinyo Maru and Sanyo Maru. After resurfacing, he spotted another target, the passenger ship Anyo Maru. 3 torpedoes struck the vessel, triggering an explosion so massive it could be felt 4,000 yards away. Shrapnel from the doomed ship rained from the sky like metal hail. The Barb had struck a Japanese ammunition transport, turning night into day with the force of the detonation. 2 weeks later, in the early morning of January 22nd through 23rd, Flucky made a decision that naval historians would call virtually a suicide mission. He had located more than 30 Japanese merchant ships hiding in Namquan Harbour along the Chinese coast. The harbour was a death trap, surrounded by mines, shallow waters, rock obstructions, and patrolling frigates. Naval doctrine dictated that submarines avoid such heavily defended anchorages. Flucky studied the harbour's geography and announced they were going in. The attack would take place on a moonless night, navigating through uncharted waters in complete darkness, while enemy patrol boats cruised nearby. His crew trusted him completely by this point. They had seen the impossible become routine under his command. The Barb crept into Namquan Harbour in the pre-dawn darkness of January 23rd at 4:02 hours, moving through water so shallow the submarine's keel nearly scraped bottom. Flucky manoeuvred around patrolling warships, positioning the Barb at a range of 3,000 yards from the anchored merchant fleet. The crew calculated their escape route precisely, knowing they would need to exit at full speed through mined waters while under attack. Flucky gave the order. The Barb fired 10 torpedoes in rapid succession. 6 from the bow tubes followed immediately by all 4 stern tubes as the submarine executed a sharp turn. 8 torpedoes found targets, striking 6 different ships with thunderous explosions. Post-war assessment officially credited 1 sinking, though Coastwatcher reports suggested 4 ships actually went down. Then chaos erupted. Patrol boats raced toward the submarine's position. Shore batteries opened fire. Searchlights swept across the water. Japanese aircraft scrambled into the air. Flucky ordered emergency speed. The Barb's engines roared to 150% overload capacity, driving the submarine forward at 23.5 knots, a world speed record for submarines at that time that would stand for years. The crew felt the hull vibrating from the strain as depth charges exploded in their wake. Patrol boats fired furiously at their position. A Japanese plane arrived overhead, just as the Barb reached deeper water and executed a crash dive. The submarine disappeared beneath the waves with seconds to spare. For this action, for the impossible penetration of Namquan Harbour and the high-speed escape that defied every prediction of the submarine's capabilities, Eugene Flucky was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. The Barb received a Presidential Unit citation, but Flucky was not finished revolutionizing submarine warfare. He had one more patrol to command, one more opportunity to prove that submarines could do things no one had imagined. The 12th patrol would become legendary. Before departing Pearl Harbor in June 1945, Flucky made an unusual requisition. He wanted rocket launchers installed on the Barb's deck. The Navy, accustomed to Flucky's unconventional requests by this point, agreed. Technicians bolted a 5-inch rocket launcher to the forward gun mount, capable of raising to a 45-degree angle. The system could simultaneously fire a dozen Mark 10 spin-stabilized rockets, each 4 feet long and tipped with 10 pounds of explosives, with a range of nearly 3 miles. Flucky called them ballistic missiles, though naval doctrine had no category for submarine-launched rockets. The Barb departed Pearl Harbor on June 8th, carrying 72 rockets, and a commander determined to prove submarines could bombard shore installations with ordnance that didn't require surfacing to use deck guns. The crew wondered what other innovations Flucky had planned for this patrol. The Barb arrived in the Sea of Okhotsk on June 21st and immediately began operations unlike anything in submarine warfare history. On June 22nd, Flucky positioned the submarine 1 mile off the town of Shari on Hokkaido's coast. The town of 20,000 people sat peacefully unaware as the Barb surfaced in the pre-dawn darkness at 2:30 hours, 5,250 yards offshore. Flucky gave the order. 12 rockets screamed from the launcher, arcing through the air toward the town centre. They struck factories and industrial buildings, causing damage but no major fires. The Japanese believed they were under air attack. By the time they realized what had actually occurred, the Barb had submerged and slipped away. The submarine had become the first in naval history to successfully employ rockets against shore installations. But Flucky's true target lay further north. For the next month, the Barb conducted a campaign of harassment along the Karafuto coast that demonstrated Flucky's philosophy of taking the war directly to the enemy. The submarine bombarded the garrison on Tiuleni Island with conventional deck guns on July 2nd, destroying structures and starting fires. On July 5th, torpedoes from the Barb sank the Japanese merchant Sapporo Maru just outside Odomari Harbour. On July 8th, deck guns sank a small tug in La Perouse Strait. The submarine attacked sampans with gunfire, sank trawlers, and launched rocket attacks against the towns of Shikuka on July 3rd and Shiritoru. Each attack followed the same pattern: surface under cover of darkness or early morning, strike with overwhelming firepower, disappear before enemy forces could respond. The Japanese began to fear what they called the ghost submarine that appeared without warning and vanished into mist. Commander Flucky was systematically demonstrating that even late in the war, even with Japan's homeland waters supposedly secure, American submarines could operate with impunity. But on July 19th, Flucky observed something that sparked an idea more audacious than anything he had yet attempted. Through the periscope, he watched a train moving along tracks that hugged the eastern coastline of Karafuto. The railroad ran between the towns that dotted southern Sakhalin, carrying troops and supplies to Japanese forces still manning defences in preparation for an Allied invasion that everyone knew was coming. Flucky studied the terrain, noting how the tracks ran close to the shore in several places. The trains operated on predictable schedules. The coastline offered approaches where a submarine could surface relatively close to shore without immediately attracting attention. An idea began forming, one so unprecedented that no naval manual addressed it because no one had ever considered it possible. What if a submarine didn't just attack ships? What if it sent a landing party ashore to sabotage enemy infrastructure? What if the USS Barb could sink a train? The crew's reaction to Flucky's proposal ranged from enthusiastic to incredulous. Chief of the boat Paul Golden Swish Saunders, the most experienced submariner aboard and a veteran of all 12 of the Barb's war patrols since her commissioning, immediately volunteered. So did electrician's mate Billy R. Hatfield, whose childhood experience placing walnuts on railroad tracks to watch trains crack them open gave him an insight crucial to the mission's success. Every member of the crew volunteered, but Flucky imposed strict criteria. He wanted only unmarried men, reasoning that if something went wrong, he didn't want to create widows. He preferred men with Boy Scout experience, figuring those who had learned land navigation and outdoor skills would have better chances of finding their way back if separated from the group. He needed men who could remain calm under extreme pressure and improvise solutions to unexpected problems. From dozens of volunteers, he selected 8: Paul G. Saunders, Billy R. Hatfield, Francis Neil Seaver, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klinglesmith, James E. Richard, John Markison, and Lieutenant William M. Walker. The planning began immediately, but one critical problem threatened the entire operation. How would they detonate the explosive? Originally, Flucky considered having a crewman remain hidden near the tracks to manually trigger the charge when a train approached. The risks of this plan were obvious. The saboteur would need to evade Japanese patrols, find a hiding spot with a clear view of the tracks, wait for a train of unknown schedule, trigger the explosion at precisely the right moment, then escape through hostile territory back to the beach where the Barb might or might not still be waiting. The probability of capture or death was unacceptably high. Then Billy Hatfield spoke up with a memory from childhood. As a boy growing up along railroad tracks, Hatfield had placed walnuts between the ties, positioning them so the weight of passing trains would press down on the rails and crack the nuts open. He explained to Flucky how even the heaviest trains caused rails to sag slightly under their weight, creating predictable downward pressure between any two ties. What if they used a microswitch positioned between ties, set so the natural sagging of the rail under a train's weight would close the circuit and detonate the charge? The train would blow itself up. No one needed to remain ashore. The saboteurs could plant the explosive, return to the submarine, and let physics do the rest. Flucky immediately recognized the elegance of the solution. Hatfield not only had the idea, he had the electrical expertise to build the triggering mechanism. The impossible mission suddenly became merely extremely dangerous. The Barb's crew transformed into an improvised weapons development laboratory. Since submarines carried no shovels or picks for digging, engineers cut up steel plates from the engine room's lower flats, then bent and welded them into serviceable digging tools. Hatfield rigged a 55-pound demolition charge, combining a scuttling charge with 3 batteries for power, all housed inside a watertight container. The microswitch mechanism required careful calibration. Too sensitive, and the weight of wind or animals might trigger it prematurely. Too insensitive, and a train's weight might not activate it at all. Hatfield tested and retested the system, adjusting the tension until he was confident it would work. The crew fabricated everything needed for the mission from materials available on the submarine, demonstrating the same ingenuity that had characterized the Barb's entire service under Flucky's command. While equipment was being prepared, Flucky studied the coastal terrain and train schedules. For 3 nights, the Barb surfaced offshore after dark, and Flucky observed the railroad through his periscope. He noted that trains passed at roughly predictable intervals, usually carrying between 12 and 20 cars. The schedule suggested trains ran every few hours during daylight and less frequently at night. The coastline featured several spots where the submarine could approach within 950 yards of shore without risking running aground. The beach offered a gentle slope from the waterline to the railroad embankment approximately 400 yards inland. Trees and vegetation provided cover for the approach. The terrain offered escape routes if the saboteurs encountered Japanese patrols. Flucky selected this location for the landing. Now they needed weather. The mission required cloud cover to conceal the submarine's approach and the landing party's movements. For 4 days, the crew waited while Flucky anxiously watched the skies. Clear weather meant postponing the operation, and time was running out. The Barb's 12th patrol was scheduled to end soon, and Flucky needed to return to Midway by August 2nd. Each day of waiting increased the chances they would have to abandon the mission. Then, on July 22nd, Flucky noticed cirrus clouds building above the coastal mountains. White stratus clouds began capping the peaks. A weather front was moving in, bringing the cloud cover they needed. Flucky made the decision. The mission would proceed that night. Shortly after midnight on July 23, 1945, the USS Barb surfaced 950 yards off the Karafuto coast. In the darkness, the submarine's silhouette could easily be mistaken for a small patrol boat or schooner, common sights in these waters. The crew lowered 2 rubber rafts to the water quietly, conscious that sound carried far over calm seas. The 8 saboteurs climbed down from the deck, carrying the 55-pound explosive charge, the improvised digging tools, the microswitch detonator, batteries and weapons for self-defense. Commander Flucky had considered giving them a dramatic Hollywood-style send-off, something memorable and inspiring. Instead, looking at these 8 men about to become the only American ground combat force to operate on Japanese home territory during the entire war, all he could think to say was practical advice. Boys, if you get stuck, head for Siberia, 130 miles north. Follow the mountain ranges. Good luck. The saboteurs paddled silently toward the shore, taking 25 minutes to cover the distance. As they approached the beach, they realized their navigation had been imperfect. Instead of landing on an isolated stretch of coastline, they came ashore with houses visible nearby. Fortunately, no dogs barked, though the sight of human and dog footprints in the sand alerted them that people lived in the area and posed potential danger. They pulled the rafts onto the beach and moved quickly inland, carrying their equipment and weapons. The darkness provided cover, but it also made navigation difficult. They had lost their points of reference during the approach and needed to reorient themselves to find the railroad tracks. Moving through unfamiliar terrain in enemy territory tested every man's nerve. They crossed small streams, pushed through vegetation, and climbed the embankment leading toward the railroad. The weight of the explosive and equipment slowed their progress. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness, the snap of twigs underfoot, the rustle of leaves, their own breathing. They reached the railroad tracks after moving approximately 400 yards inland from the beach. Now came the critical work. Using the improvised tools, they began digging between 2 ties, excavating a hole deep enough to house the explosive charge and batteries. The ground was harder than anticipated, and progress was slow. Time pressed on them with physical weight. They needed to complete the work, return to the beach, and paddle back to the Barb before dawn exposed them to observation. As they worked, they heard something that stopped every heart. The distant whistle of an approaching train. The sound grew louder, and suddenly they could see a headlight in the distance, growing brighter as the locomotive approached their position. They had not yet finished burying the explosive or setting the microswitch trigger. 8 men froze, uncertain whether to abandon the mission or hide, and hope the train crew didn't notice them. They chose to hide, pressing themselves into bushes mere feet from the tracks as the train thundered past. The ground shook from the locomotive's weight. They could see Japanese soldiers in the passenger cars, so close that any one of them glancing out a window at the right moment might have spotted the Americans. The train passed without incident, disappearing down the tracks. The saboteurs waited until the sound faded completely, then resumed their work with renewed urgency. They had been given a second chance and could not waste it. With the explosive charge and batteries positioned in the hull, Hatfield carefully connected the microswitch mechanism. The device needed to sit between two ties with precise positioning, so the rail's downward sag under train weight would close the circuit without premature detonation. Hatfield made the final adjustments, tested the connections one last time, then covered everything with dirt. From the surface, the disturbed earth between the ties appeared unremarkable, just another section of railroad bed indistinguishable from hundreds of others stretching along the coast. The work was complete. Now they needed to leave before another train arrived or Japanese patrols discovered them. The 8 saboteurs moved quickly back toward the beach, retracing their route as best they could in darkness. They found the rafts where they had left them, climbed aboard, and began paddling toward the barb's position offshore. At 1:32 hours, they signalled their departure from shore. Aboard the submarine, Commander Flucky anxiously watched the shoreline through his periscope. The landing party had been ashore longer than planned. Every minute that passed increased the danger of discovery. The barb sat vulnerable on the surface, unable to crash dive quickly with crew members still in the water. If Japanese patrol boats or aircraft appeared, Flucky would face an impossible decision between his crew's safety and the lives of the 8 men returning from shore. He kept scanning the darkness, searching for the small rubber rafts against the black water. Then he saw them, 2 tiny shapes moving slowly across the calm surface. They were safe and returning. Relief swept through the submarine's crew. But the mission was not yet complete. They still needed to wait for a train. The saboteurs were halfway back to the submarine, paddling steadily through the darkness, when at 1:47 hours they got their answer. 15 minutes after departing the beach, they witnessed the result of their work. In the distance, a train whistle pierced the pre-dawn darkness. Through binoculars, the crew spotted a headlight approaching from the north, a locomotive pulling a long string of cars toward the exact spot where Hatfield's microswitch waited between the ties. The train grew closer, moving at standard speed, unaware of the trap ahead. Every man on the barb held his breath. The locomotive reached the trigger point. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the explosive charge detonated with tremendous force. Commander Flucky later described the moment in his memoir, Thunder Below. The boilers of the engine blew, engine wreckage flying up some 200 feet, racing ahead of a mushroom of smoke, now white, now black. Cars piling up, into and over the wall of wreckage in front, rolling off the track in a writhing, twisting maelstrom of Gordian knots. The explosion lit up the coastline like a miniature sun. Pieces of the locomotive flew 200 feet into the air, tumbling end over end before crashing back to earth. Train cars derailed and piled into a twisted mass of metal and wood. Secondary explosions erupted as cargo ignited. The fireball illuminated the submarine's position clearly enough that any observer on shore could have seen them. But the Japanese were focused entirely on the catastrophic destruction of their train. The saboteurs, still paddling toward the barb, watched in awe as their improvised device exceeded all expectations. Flucky grabbed the intercom. All hands below deck not absolutely needed to manoeuvre, the ship have permission to come topside. He didn't need to repeat the invitation. Hatches sprang open and sailors poured onto the deck to watch the distant fireworks display. The barb had accomplished the impossible. A submarine had sunk a train. As the barb moved away from the coast toward safer waters, the magnitude of what they had achieved began to sink in. This was not just an unusual military action. It was the only ground combat operation conducted by American forces on Japanese home territory during the entire Second World War. Karafuto, the southern portion of Sakhalin Island, had been formally proclaimed part of Japan's Naichi, or Inner Lands, in April 1943, giving it full home island status alongside Hokkaido, Honshu, Kyushu, and Shikoku. While American aircraft had bombed Japanese cities and submarines had torpedoed coastal shipping, no other American military unit had landed personnel on Japanese sovereign territory to conduct sabotage operations. The 8 men who paddled ashore had accomplished something unprecedented in military history. Commander Flucky's willingness to ignore the limitations of naval doctrine, combined with his crew's ingenuity and courage, had created a moment that would become legendary in submarine warfare lore. The Barb continued her patrol for another week, conducting additional rocket attacks and shore bombardments. On July 24th, she launched 3 rocket barrages against factories at Shiratori on Sakhalin Island. On July 25th, the submarine bombarded a cannery at Chiri with conventional deck guns, then conducted her final rocket attack against factories at Kashiho. On July 26th, the Barb attacked Shibutoro on Kunishiro Island, destroying a lumber mill and sampan building yard. She rammed and sank a trawler after setting it on fire, then captured 3 more Japanese prisoners. The aggressive campaign demonstrated that even in the final weeks of the war, American submarines remained offensive weapons capable of striking at will along Japan's coastline. The Barb arrived at Midway Atoll on August 2, 1945. Her 12th war patrol concluded. The submarine had endured approximately 400 shells, bombs, and depth charges during her last 5 patrols under Flucky's command, surviving narrow escapes that should have resulted in her loss. Yet she returned without a single casualty. Not one member of her crew had received a Purple Heart for wounds suffered in combat during any of her patrols. Commander Flucky was awarded his 4th Navy Cross for the 12th patrol, bringing his total decorations to 1 Medal of Honor and 4 Navy Crosses, making him one of the most decorated officers in United States Navy history. The Barb received a Navy Unit Commendation for her final patrol, adding to the 4 Presidential Unit citations she had already earned. The submarine's battle flag, displayed after returning from patrol, told the story of her extraordinary service. The flag showed patches representing each of her major accomplishments: 17 confirmed ship sinkings, the Presidential Unit Citation ribbons, the Medal of Honor ribbon honoring Flucky's decoration, and most unusually, the silhouette of a Japanese locomotive. No other submarine in any Navy's history had ever earned the right to display a train on its battle flag. Photographers captured the 8 saboteurs at Pearl Harbor holding the battle flag, grinning at the camera, proud of their role in naval history. The image would become iconic, representing not just one mission, but the entire philosophy of aggressive innovation that characterized submarine warfare in the Pacific. The statistics of the Barb's service under Commander Flucky established records that demonstrated what was possible when tactical innovation combined with technical excellence and crew dedication. During the 5 patrols Flucky commanded, from May 1944 to August 1945, the Barb was officially credited with sinking 17 enemy vessels totaling 96,628 tons, according to the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee's post-war evaluation. This included the escort carrier Unyo, one of only 4 Japanese carriers sunk by American submarines during the entire war, along with numerous cargo ships, tankers, and patrol vessels. The tonnage total ranked Flucky among the top submarine captains in terms of enemy shipping destroyed. His record was extraordinary by any measure. Beyond the numbers, the Barb's significance lay in demonstrating how submarines could evolve beyond their traditional role. Flucky proved that submarines could penetrate heavily defended harbours, escape at speeds previously thought impossible, launch rockets at shore installations, conduct humanitarian rescue missions in combat zones, and send landing parties ashore to commit sabotage. Each of these actions challenged conventional thinking about submarine capabilities. Naval doctrine evolved to incorporate lessons from the Barb's operations. Future submarine commanders studied Flucky's tactics, and the aggressive spirit he embodied, became part of submarine force culture. The Barb's legacy extended far beyond her wartime service. The submarine's story did not end with the war. After hostilities ceased, the Barb was placed in commissioned reserve on March 9, 1946, then decommissioned on February 12, 1947 at New London, Connecticut. She was recommissioned on December 3, 1951, and assigned to the Atlantic Fleet, operating out of Key West, Florida. After being decommissioned again on February 5, 1954, she underwent Guppy conversion, the Greater Underwater Propulsion Power Program that modernized World War II submarines with streamlined hulls and snorkels for extended underwater operations. She was recommissioned on August 3, 1954, for final service, before being decommissioned permanently on December 13, 1954. Under the Mutual Defence Assistance Programme, the Barb was loaned to Italy and renamed Enrico Tazzoli, serving the Italian Navy until 1972, when she was sold for scrap for approximately $100,000. Admiral Fluckey later noted that had the crew known of the sale, they would have purchased the submarine themselves and brought her back to the United States to serve as a museum ship, preserving her for future generations. Eugene Fluckey's career continued with distinction after leaving the Barb. He became an aide to Navy Secretary James Forrestal and to Admiral Chester Nimitz, Chief of Naval Operations. He served as Commander Submarine Force Pacific Fleet from June 1964 to June 1966, overseeing the entire Pacific submarine fleet during a critical period of the Cold War. In July 1966, he became Director of Naval Intelligence, providing strategic intelligence analysis during the Vietnam War era. 2 years later, he was appointed Chief of the Military Assistance Advisory Group in Portugal, serving in that capacity until his retirement from active duty as a Rear Admiral on August 1, 1972. His post-military life reflected the same dedication to helping others that had characterized his naval service. In 1974, he and his wife Marjorie started running an orphanage in Portugal, continuing that work until Marjorie's death in 1979 after 42 years of marriage. He married his second wife Margaret in 1980, and they continued running the orphanage together until it closed in 1982. In 1992, Fluckey published his memoir Thunder Below. The USS Barb revolutionizes submarine warfare in World War II, providing detailed accounts of the submarine's operations and offering insights into his tactical philosophy. The book became essential reading for submarine officers and naval historians, preserving the story of the Barb's extraordinary service for future generations. Fluckey remained active in naval affairs and submarine force reunions until his death in Annapolis, Maryland on June 28, 2007 at age 93. He was buried at the United States Naval Academy Cemetery, joining the ranks of naval heroes who had shaped American maritime power. His passing marked the end of an era, the loss of one of the last great submarine commanders from the Second World War, who had revolutionized undersea warfare through aggressive innovation and tactical brilliance. The 8 saboteurs who paddled ashore near Kashiho on that July night in 1945 lived the rest of their lives knowing they had participated in something unique in military history. Paul G. Saunders, the chief of the boat whose experience and leadership helped make the mission possible, became one of the Navy's most decorated enlisted men. His awards included 2 Silver Stars, 1 Bronze Star, a Presidential Unit Citation, a Navy Unit Commendation, a Letter of Commendation with ribbon recognizing his heroic actions in combat, the Submarine Combat Pin, the Victory Medal, and numerous campaign ribbons. He remained proud throughout his life of his service aboard the Barb and his role in the train demolition. Billy R. Hatfield, whose childhood memory of cracking walnuts on railroad tracks provided the solution to the mission's most difficult technical challenge, never forgot the moment when his improvised microswitch triggered the explosion that destroyed the train. The other 6 men, Francis N. Seaver, Lawrence W. Newland, Edward W. Klinglesmith, James E. Richard, John Markison, and Lieutenant William M. Walker, returned to civilian life after the war, carrying the knowledge that they had accomplished something no other American servicemen could claim. The historical significance of the train demolition operation has grown with time, as historians have recognized its unique place in World War II history. While American forces conducted numerous amphibious landings and ground operations across the Pacific Islands, capturing territory from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima to Okinawa, those operations occurred on islands that Japan had conquered during its expansion. The Japanese home islands remained inviolate to ground operations throughout the war, with one exception. 8 men from the USS Barb paddled ashore onto Karafuto, which Japan considered an integral part of its homeland, planted explosives, and successfully destroyed enemy infrastructure before escaping. The operation demonstrated that even Japan's home territory was vulnerable to American military action, undermining the psychological assumption that the homeland remained secure. The strategic impact of the operation was primarily psychological rather than material. Destroying one train, even with its cargo and passengers, did not significantly affect Japan's ability to wage war in July 1945. By that point, American bombing campaigns had devastated Japanese cities, destroyed much of the nation's industrial capacity, and severed maritime supply lines. The Japanese military was preparing for what they expected would be a massive Allied invasion of the home islands, planning to use every available resource, including civilian militia, to resist the landing forces. One demolished train barely registered in the larger strategic picture. But the symbolic impact was profound. If American submarines could send landing parties ashore to blow up trains, what else might they do? If the coastline was vulnerable to sabotage, how many troops would Japan need to dedicate to coastal defense rather than preparing for the expected invasion? The operation succeeded in creating uncertainty and forcing Japanese commanders to consider threats they had previously dismissed as impossible. The timing of the operation, occurring just weeks before Japan's surrender, has led some historians to question whether it was necessary. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima on August 6th and Nagasaki on August 9th, combined with the Soviet Union's declaration of war and invasion of Manchuria, forced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. The formal surrender documents were signed on September 2nd in Tokyo Bay aboard the USS Missouri. Military analysts have long debated whether the atomic bombs were necessary to end the war, or whether Japan was already on the verge of surrender due to conventional bombing, naval blockade, and diplomatic pressure. The Barb's train demolition occurred in this context, just 2 weeks before the first atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. Some have suggested that continuing aggressive submarine operations in late July 1945 unnecessarily risked American lives when the war's end was imminent. Others argue that until Japan actually surrendered, American forces had a duty to maintain maximum pressure through all available means. The broader context of American submarine warfare in the Pacific provides the frame for understanding the Barb's achievements. American submarines entered the war poorly equipped and hampered by defective torpedoes. The Mark 14 torpedo, which equipped most submarines in 1941 and 1942, suffered from multiple serious problems. The magnetic exploder often detonated prematurely or failed to detonate at all. The contact exploder frequently failed to trigger upon impact. The torpedoes ran deeper than set depth, passing harmlessly beneath their targets. These defects were not fully corrected until late 1943, costing American submariners countless lost opportunities and putting them at severe risk as they pressed attacks that should have sunk enemy ships, but resulted only in revealing their positions. Despite these handicaps, American submarines gradually strangled Japan's economy by sinking the merchant vessels that transported raw materials and finished goods between Japan and its conquered territories. The statistics of American submarine warfare demonstrate the decisive impact of undersea operations on Japan's ability to wage war. American submarines sank 1,314 Japanese vessels, comprising 1,113 merchant ships and 201 naval vessels, totaling approximately 5.32 million tons, according to the official Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee post-war evaluation. This represented roughly 55% of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost during the war. They also sank 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, 11 cruisers, and numerous destroyers and submarines. This came at significant cost. The United States lost 52 submarines during the war, 51 in the Pacific and 1 in the Atlantic, the highest loss rate of any branch of the American military. Approximately 22% of American submariners who served in combat did not return, with 374 officers and 3,131 enlisted men killed, a casualty rate that exceeded even that of Marine infantry. The men who volunteered for submarine duty knew they faced extraordinary dangers in a branch of service where there was no such thing as a minor accident. A submarine could be lost with all hands due to equipment failure, enemy action, or simple miscalculation, and recovery of remains was usually impossible. The cultural impact of the Barb's train demolition has persisted in American naval tradition and popular culture. The story has been retold in countless books, articles, and documentaries about submarine warfare. It appears in Naval Academy curricula as an example of tactical innovation. The image of the battle flag with the train silhouette has become iconic, representing the spirit of aggressive action that characterized the American submarine force in the Pacific. In reunions and ceremonies, surviving crew members of the Barb have been honored for their service, particularly the 8 saboteurs who conducted the only ground combat operation on Japanese home territory. The story has entered submarine force culture as an example of what can be accomplished when commanders think beyond traditional limitations, and crews demonstrate the ingenuity and courage to execute unconventional operations. Modern submarine operations have evolved far beyond what Commander Fluckey and the Barb's crew could have imagined in 1945. Nuclear-powered submarines can remain submerged for months, carrying ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads or cruise missiles that can strike targets hundreds of miles inland. Submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles represent the evolution of Fluckey's rocket launchers, precision weapons that can be fired from underwater to destroy specific buildings from hundreds of miles away. Modern submarines carry sophisticated electronics that would seem like science fiction to World War II submariners. Yet despite all these technological advances, the fundamental principles that Fluckey demonstrated remain valid. Aggressive action, tactical innovation, crew excellence, and willingness to attempt operations beyond conventional doctrine continue to characterize the most successful submarine operations. The spirit of the Barb lives on in every submarine that pushes the boundaries of what is considered possible. The fate of the 8 saboteurs and the other crew members of the Barb after the war reflected the experiences of millions of American servicemen who returned to civilian life. They had witnessed and participated in events of extraordinary historical significance, yet most resumed normal lives, raised families, pursued careers, and rarely spoke about their wartime service except with fellow veterans who understood. The heroism and innovation that characterized their service aboard the Barb did not translate easily to civilian contexts. How do you explain to someone who has never served on a submarine what it feels like to navigate through a mined harbour at night, knowing that one wrong calculation means death for everyone aboard? How do you convey the terror and exhilaration of paddling through enemy waters to plant explosives on a railroad, fully aware that capture means torture and execution? Most chose not to try, keeping their experiences private except on rare occasions when circumstances brought them together with the men who had shared those moments. The battle flag of the USS Barb remains on display at the Submarine Force Library and Museum in Groton, Connecticut, where visitors can see the train silhouette and read about the submarine's extraordinary service. The flag serves as a tangible connection to a moment in history when 8 men paddled through darkness onto enemy shores to accomplish something that military doctrine said was impossible. Looking at that flag, visitors can imagine the scene: the submarine surfacing in hostile waters, the rubber rafts being lowered silently, the saboteurs paddling toward an uncertain fate, the anxious waiting aboard the Barb, and the spectacular explosion that announced success. The flag represents more than one mission. It symbolizes the spirit of innovation and aggressive action that characterized American submarine warfare in the Pacific, and demonstrates what can be accomplished when leadership encourages rather than constrains creative thinking. The story of how one submarine's impossible raid blew up a train in Japan ultimately teaches lessons that transcend military history. It demonstrates that limitations often exist more in assumptions than in reality, that conventional thinking about what is possible can be challenged successfully, that technical problems can be solved through ingenuity when intelligent people are given freedom to innovate, and that leadership willing to take calculated risks can achieve results that conservative approaches never reach. Commander Eugene Fluckey's greatest contribution was not the tonnage he sank, or even the Medal of Honor he earned. It was proving that the rule book of submarine warfare was incomplete, that submarines could do far more than doctrine specified, and that the only real limitation was imagination combined with courage. The 8 men who paddled ashore on July 23, 1945, had no way of knowing that their mission would become legendary. They were simply submariners following orders from a commander they trusted, attempting an operation that seemed barely feasible but worth trying because their commander believed it possible. When the train exploded at 1:47 hours and pieces of locomotive flew 200 feet into the air, they experienced a moment of pure vindication. The impossible had become real. A submarine had sunk a train. That moment would be frozen in history, commemorated on battle flags, recorded in books, studied at naval academies, and remembered as proof that with sufficient skill, courage, and innovation, even the most improbable missions can succeed. The USS Barb's greatest legacy is not found in statistics of tonnage sunk or decorations earned. It lives in the inspiration provided to future generations of military personnel who face their own impossible missions and remember that there once was a submarine that sank a train. The Barb demonstrated that submarines were not limited to attacking ships in open water. They could penetrate defended harbours that should have been suicide traps. They could launch rockets at shore installations like surface warships. They could rescue drowning prisoners in typhoon conditions. They could send men ashore to blow up trains on enemy territory. Each of these accomplishments expanded the definition of what submarines could achieve. Commander Fluckey's philosophy permeated every aspect of the Barb's operations. He believed that submarines should take the offensive whenever possible, that risks could be calculated and managed rather than simply avoided, that crew ingenuity should be encouraged rather than constrained by rigid procedures, and that the best defence was often an aggressive offence that kept the enemy off balance. This philosophy produced results that spoke for themselves. The Barb sank more tonnage under Fluckey's command than most submarines achieved in their entire service lives. She conducted operations that other commanders considered impossible. She survived situations that should have resulted in her loss, and she did all of this without losing a single crew member to enemy action. The relationship between Fluckey and his crew exemplified the best traditions of naval leadership. He demanded excellence, but provided the tools and authority his men needed to achieve it. He took responsibility for failures and shared credit for successes. He treated his crew with respect and genuine concern for their welfare, reportedly keeping cases of beer in the enlisted showers to reward successful engagements despite regulations. His men responded with absolute loyalty and willingness to attempt missions that would have seemed suicidal under less capable leadership. They trusted Fluckey because he had proven repeatedly that his unconventional tactics worked, that his calculations of risk were accurate, and that he would get them home safely. The technical innovations that made the train demolition possible reflected the same creative problem-solving that characterized all of the Barb's operations. Faced with the need for digging tools, the crew fabricated them from steel plates. Confronted with the challenge of detonating an explosive without leaving someone ashore, Billy Hatfield remembered childhood experiences and adapted them into a functional trigger mechanism. Required to test and calibrate sensitive equipment with limited resources, the crew worked through multiple iterations until they achieved the precise sensitivity needed. These solutions came not from following established procedures, but from intelligent men given the freedom to innovate and the confidence that their ideas would be seriously considered. The train mission also demonstrated the importance of patience and timing in military operations. Fluckey spent 3 nights observing the railroad before committing to the mission. He waited 4 days for weather conditions that would provide adequate cloud cover. He selected his landing party based on careful criteria designed to maximize their chances of success and minimize the consequences of failure. He planned the operation in meticulous detail while maintaining flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. This combination of thorough preparation and tactical flexibility characterized Fluckey's entire approach to submarine warfare. The psychological impact of the mission extended beyond its immediate military effects. Japanese commanders who learned of the train demolition faced uncomfortable questions. If American submarines could land saboteurs who successfully destroyed infrastructure and escaped, what other vulnerabilities existed along Japan's extensive coastline? How many troops would need to be diverted from defending against the expected invasion to patrol thousands of miles of shore? Could submarine-launched raiders strike at any time and place of their choosing? These questions had no satisfactory answers, and the uncertainty they created had strategic value beyond the tactical destruction of one train. The mission also represented the culmination of the Barb's evolution under Fluckey's command. From a submarine with an unremarkable record in her first 7 patrols, the Barb transformed into the most innovative and aggressive submarine in the Pacific Fleet. This transformation occurred not through changes in equipment or personnel, but through leadership that encouraged rather than constrained excellence. Fluckey's willingness to attempt operations that other commanders dismissed as impossible created a culture aboard the Barb where innovation was expected and remarkable achievements became routine. The contrast between the Barb's early patrols and her performance under Fluckey highlights the decisive role of leadership in military effectiveness. The submarine herself remained largely unchanged. The basic crew skills and technical capabilities were comparable. What changed was the commander's vision of what submarines could accomplish and his willingness to test the boundaries of possible. This transformation suggests that many military units operate below their potential capacity, not because of limitations in equipment or personnel, but because of limitations in imagination and willingness to take calculated risks. The story of the USS Barb and her impossible raid also serves as a reminder that military innovation often comes from practitioners rather than theorists. Naval doctrine manuals did not suggest that submarines should attack trains. No staff college curriculum included lessons on submarine-launched ground operations. The idea came from a commander observing a tactical opportunity and asking, "Why not?" rather than accepting conventional wisdom about what submarines did. This pattern of innovation driven by operational commanders willing to question doctrine has characterized military evolution throughout history. The train mission's success vindicated Fluckey's entire philosophy of submarine warfare. Critics within the submarine force had questioned some of his more aggressive tactics, suggesting that he took unnecessary risks and that his success reflected luck rather than skill. The train demolition demonstrated that Fluckey's success came from careful calculation, thorough preparation, crew excellence, and tactical innovation rather than reckless gambling. The mission succeeded because every aspect was carefully planned and executed, from equipment fabrication to timing to escape routes. The fact that it appeared impossible beforehand reflected limitations in conventional thinking rather than genuine impossibility. The broader significance of the USS Barb's service under Eugene Fluckey extends beyond World War II submarine operations. The Barb demonstrated principles that remain relevant to military operations today. Mission success depends on leadership that encourages innovation, crews trained to think creatively rather than simply follow procedures, willingness to attempt operations outside established doctrine when tactical advantage justifies the risk, thorough preparation combined with flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances, and cultivation of organizational culture that expects excellence and treats remarkable achievements as attainable rather than exceptional. These principles transcend specific technologies or tactical situations. They apply equally to nuclear submarines, surface warships, aircraft operations, ground combat, and special operations forces. The USS Barb's legacy lives on wherever military personnel push beyond conventional limitations to achieve objectives that initially appear impossible. Every successful special operations mission, every innovative tactical solution, every commander who questions whether doctrine adequately addresses the current situation, reflects the spirit that Eugene Fluckey brought to submarine warfare in 1944 and 1945. The story of the submarine that sank a train remains compelling decades after the event because it captures fundamental truths about human capability and achievement. When people work together toward a common goal, when leadership encourages rather than constrains creativity, when technical problems are viewed as challenges to overcome rather than insurmountable obstacles, remarkable things become possible. The 8 men who paddled ashore onto enemy territory and successfully destroyed a train proved that courage, ingenuity, and determination can accomplish missions that appear impossible beforehand. The USS Barb returned from her 12th war patrol having revolutionized submarine warfare in ways that would influence naval operations for decades. She proved that submarines could successfully employ rockets against shore installations, a capability that evolved into modern submarine-launched cruise missiles. She demonstrated that submarines could penetrate heavily defended anchorages that should have been death traps, validating aggressive tactics that would be studied and emulated by future submarine commanders. She showed that submarines could conduct humanitarian rescue operations in combat zones, setting precedents for submarine involvement in rescue and recovery missions. And she proved that submarines could send landing parties ashore to conduct sabotage operations, expanding the definition of submarine warfare beyond attacking ships at sea. Each of these innovations challenged existing doctrine and required convincing skeptical superior officers that unconventional operations were worth attempting. Fluckey's success in achieving approval for his most audacious operations reflected his credibility earned through consistent success, his ability to articulate clear tactical rationale for unconventional approaches, his demonstrated skill in calculating and managing risk, and his track record of bringing his crew home safely, despite conducting operations other commanders considered suicidal. This credibility gave him latitude to attempt missions that would have been denied to less proven commanders. The relationship between innovation and credibility in military organizations deserves emphasis. New approaches and unconventional tactics face inherent skepticism in organizations built on tradition and proven procedures. Innovators must establish credibility through consistent success before they gain authority to attempt truly revolutionary operations. Fluckey's progression from competent submarine commander to revolutionary tactical innovator followed this pattern. His early successes with relatively conventional operations established his credibility. That credibility then provided latitude to attempt more aggressive tactics, which generated additional success that further enhanced his credibility. This positive feedback loop culminated in approval for operations like the train demolition that would have been rejected if proposed by commanders with less established track records. The final assessment of the USS Barb's service under Eugene Fluckey must acknowledge both the remarkable achievements and their context within the larger Pacific submarine campaign. The Barb was one of approximately 250 submarines that served in the Pacific during World War II. While her record was extraordinary, many other submarines also achieved impressive results through aggressive action and tactical skill. The difference was degree rather than kind. What made the Barb exceptional was the consistency of excellence across multiple patrols, the variety of tactical innovations successfully employed, and the symbolic significance of operations like the train demolition that captured public imagination. Yet the Barb's achievements also reflected advantages that many submarines lacked. She served late enough in the war to benefit from corrected torpedoes, improved radar and electronics, refined tactics based on 3 years of combat experience, and degraded Japanese anti-submarine capabilities as their navy suffered progressive attrition. Earlier submarines fought with defective torpedoes against a more capable enemy. The Barb's record, while exceptional, was built on foundations laid by submarines that achieved less spectacular results while fighting under more difficult conditions. This context does not diminish the Barb's achievements, but rather places them in proper perspective. The submarine's success reflected the combination of Eugene Fluckey's tactical genius, exceptional crew performance, technological improvements, refined doctrine, and favourable strategic circumstances. Remove any of these elements and the results would have been different. The Barb's story is not just about one brilliant commander or one exceptional crew, but about the entire system of submarine warfare as it evolved to decisive effectiveness by 1945. The enduring fascination with the USS Barb and her impossible raid on a Japanese train speaks to universal themes that transcend military history. People are drawn to stories of underdogs achieving unlikely victories, of creative problem-solving overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles, of courage and determination succeeding against long odds, and of teams working together to accomplish missions that individuals could never achieve alone. The Barb's story contains all these elements wrapped in the dramatic context of submarine warfare during history's largest and most destructive conflict. The image of 8 men paddling through darkness toward enemy shores, carrying improvised explosives to attack a target no submarine had ever considered engaging, captures imagination in ways that statistics about tonnage sunk cannot match. The human element of the story, the fear they must have felt, the ingenuity required to solve technical challenges, the split-second decision to hide rather than abort when the first train passed, the relief when the explosion confirmed their success, makes the story compelling and memorable. These men were not superhuman warriors, but ordinary sailors placed in extraordinary circumstances, who rose to meet challenges through courage, skill, and teamwork. The USS Barb's legacy endures in the submarine force culture that values aggressive action, tactical innovation, calculated risk-taking, and crew excellence. Every submarine commanding officer who faces a tactical decision must choose between conservative safety and aggressive action that involves risk but offers greater potential reward. The Barb's story reminds them that the greatest achievements in submarine warfare have come from commanders willing to attempt operations that initially appeared impossible. This cultural legacy may be the Barb's most significant contribution, inspiring generations of submarine commanders to question whether doctrine adequately addresses current circumstances and to consider whether unconventional approaches might achieve better results. The story of how one submarine's impossible raid blew up a train in Japan concludes with the recognition that military excellence emerges from the combination of visionary leadership, skilled personnel, technological capability, refined doctrine, and favourable circumstances. The USS Barb possessed all these elements during her final 5 war patrols under Eugene Fluckey's command. The result was a record of achievement that stands among the greatest in submarine warfare history, and a legacy that continues inspiring military personnel 3/4 of a century after the events occurred. The submarine that sank a train proved that with courage, ingenuity, and determination, even the most impossible missions can succeed.